Hi guys. Tonight we're going to talk quietly about the early American continent. A vast and varied world long before modern borders existed, shaped by landscapes, climates, and the slow movement of people across land and water. Long before cities, nations, or written history, this continent was home to forests, deserts, rivers, and countless communities adapting to their surroundings. So before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Settle into a position where you can relax. If you enjoy this kind of slow, unhurried history, you're welcome to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely brings you a sense of calm or curiosity. And if you feel like it, you can leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always quietly fascinating to imagine people all over the world, in different time zones, listening to the same story, each of us winding down in our own way. Now let's begin. For eons stretching beyond the grasp of human memory, the vast expanses of the American continents lay in profound solitude, untouched by the tread of human feet or the echo of human voices. Imagine a world where the only rhythms were those of nature itself, unscripted and eternal. The wind swept across boundless grasslands that rippled like the surface of a living sea, carrying the scents of wild herbs and earth freshly turned by no hand but the elements. These plains, vast and undulating, stretch from horizon to horizon, painted in hues of gold and green under the relentless sun of summer, or blanketed in crisp white during the long, unforgiving winters. Rivers, ancient and purposeful, carved their sinuous paths through the landscape, their waters murmuring secrets to the stones they polished smooth over millennia. These waterways were lifelines in a world without witnesses, feeding into lakes that mirrored the sky's vast dome and oceans that crashed against rugged coasts with a thunderous indifference. Forests, dense and primordial, cloaked vast swaths of the land in shadows that seemed to hold the breath of time. Their canopies, interwoven with branches as thick as a man's torso, formed cathedrals of green where sunlight filtered through in dappled patterns, illuminating the forest floor like scattered jewels. The air within these woods was thick with the aroma of pine resin, decaying leaves, and the subtle musk of hidden life. Towering trees, some standing sentinel for centuries, whispered among themselves as breezes stirred their leaves, their roots delving deep into soil rich with the remnants of fallen ancestors. No axe had ever felled them, no fire set by intention had scarred their bark. They grew in unchecked abundance, a testament to the continent's quiet sovereignty. And then there were the beasts, colossal creatures that roamed this untamed realm with a majesty that defies modern comprehension. Mammoths, those woolly titans, lumbered across the tundra and plains, their trunks curling like living serpents to pluck vegetation from the ground or to trumpet calls that reverberated through the valleys. Each step they took sent tremors through the earth, as if the ground itself acknowledged their dominion. Their tusks, curved and immense, gleamed like polished ivory under the moon's pale glow, tools for foraging, defense, and perhaps even the silent rituals of their kind. Herds of these giants moved in familial groups, the calves sheltered between the massive legs of their mothers, learning the ways of migration through instinct etched into their very bones. Giant sloths, slow and deliberate, hung from the branches of ancient trees or ambled along the forest edges, their claws like scythes raking through foliage. These behemoths, taller than a standing bear when reared up, browsed lazily on leaves and fruits, their movements a counterpoint to the swift predators that shadowed them. Their fur, coarse and matted, blended with the earthy tones of their habitat, rendering them almost spectral in the dappled light. And the bison, ancient, shaggy beasts whose herds could blot out the sun's rays as they thundered across the open lands. Their hooves churned the soil into dust clouds that lingered in the air, marking their passage like ephemeral signatures. These animals knew no fear of two-legged hunters. Their world was one of balance, where predators like saber-toothed cats and dire wolves stalked with primal cunning, but the scale tipped toward harmony rather than domination. The seasons cycled in this silent world with a grandeur that spoke of cosmic patience. Spring arrived as a gentle awakening, with melting snows feeding swollen rivers and coaxing forth tender shoots from the frozen ground. Flowers bloomed in riotous colors, crimson poppies, azure lupins, drawing insects in buzzing symphonies. Summer brought heat that shimmered on the horizon, drying the grasses to a crisp whisper underfoot, while thunderstorms rolled in from the west, unleashing torrents that rejuvenated the parched earth. Autumn painted the landscapes in fiery reds and golds, as leaves fell like confetti from the trees, and animals grew thicker coats in preparation for the chill. Winter, the harshest sovereign, draped everything in ice and snow, silencing the rivers under crystalline sheets and forcing life into dormancy or migration. Yet even in this hush, the continent pulsed with vitality. The crack of ice on a frozen lake, the howl of wind through canyons, the distant rumble of an avalanche reshaping a mountain face. This land did not pine for human presence. It thrived in its isolation, a self-sustaining tapestry woven by geological forces and biological imperatives. Mountains rose jagged and snow-capped, their peaks piercing the clouds like defiant spears, home to eagles that soared on thermal updrafts, surveying domains vaster than empires. Deserts sprawled in arid splendor, where cacti stood as stoic guardians amid shifting sands, blooming briefly under rare rains to reveal hidden beauty. Coasts, battered by relentless waves, harbored tide pools teeming with life, starfish, anemones, crabs, each a microcosm of the continent's intricate web. Volcanoes slumbered or erupted in fiery displays, spewing ash that fertilized the soil for future growth. Earthquakes occasionally reshaped the terrain, reminding all that the world was alive, breathing, evolving without need for observers. In this pre-human era, emotions, if one can ascribe such to a landscape, were those of raw, unfiltered existence. The joy of a herd finding a lush valley after a long trek, the sorrow implicit in a fallen tree decaying to nourish new saplings, the fury of a blizzard burying all in white oblivion, the serenity of a calm dawn breaking over misty meadows. There was no narrative arc imposed by minds capable of reflection, only the ceaseless flow of time, measured in the growth rings of trees or the layers of sediment in riverbeds. The continent's history was written in fossils embedded in rock, in the scars of ancient glaciers that had scraped across the land, leaving behind moraines and valleys as their legacy. Yet beneath this apparent timelessness, subtle shifts were occurring. The Ice Age, that great sculptor of worlds, held the planet in its grip, but its hold was not eternal. Glaciers advanced and retreated like breathing giants, altering sea levels and climates in ways that would one day open doors to intruders from afar. Animals adapted or perished, their bones sinking into the earth to become silent witnesses. The land, in its vast indifference, continued its dance with the elements, oblivious to the fact that across a narrowing divide, human eyes were beginning to gaze eastward, drawn by the promise of the unknown. The silence of this continent was not emptiness, it was fullness, a symphony of natural forces playing out without an audience. Birds migrated in vast flocks, their wings beating a rhythmic tattoo against the sky. Fish leaped in rivers teeming with salmon runs that turned waters silver. Predators and prey engaged in eternal chases, their struggles ensuring the cycle of life persisted. No fires burned except those sparked by lightning. No paths were worn save those trodden by animal feet. The air was pure, untainted by smoke from hearths, carrying only the crisp tang of ozone after a storm or the sweet decay of autumn leaves. As the millennia unfolded, this world remained a canvas unpainted by human hands, a story untold in words. But the winds of change were stirring, far to the northwest, where the cold bite of Asia met the edge of this new realm. The continent did not wait for humans, true, but neither did it resist their inevitable arrival. It simply was, magnificent, wild, and ready to be reshaped by the footsteps that would one day echo across its expanses. In this prelude to human history, the American lands embodied the essence of untouched potential, a realm where every boulder, every blade of grass, held the quiet promise of transformation. And so, the stage was set, the actors yet to arrive, for the grand narrative that would unfold when humanity finally stepped into this new world. Far to the northeast, in the frigid expanses of what we now call Siberia and the edges of Asia, the world was ensnared in the unyielding embrace of the Ice Age, an epoch of relentless cold that shaped not just landscapes but the very soul of survival. Picture a realm where winter's dominion seemed eternal, its icy fingers gripping the earth with a ferocity that tested every living thing. The ground was often locked in permafrost, a frozen layer that extended deep into the soil, preserving the remains of ancient creatures like mummified relics from a forgotten time. Summers, when they came, were fleeting interludes of thaw, where the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across tundra that bloomed briefly with hardy flowers, Arctic poppies in defiant yellows, saxifrage clinging to rocky outcrops. But even these warm spells were tempered by chill winds that whispered of the encroaching frost, reminding all that reprieve was temporary. Glaciers dominated this world, vast sheets of ice that crept like living entities across the land, grinding rock into fine powder and carving valleys with patient, inexorable force. These frozen behemoths locked away immense volumes of water, lowering sea levels and exposing lands that would otherwise lie submerged. The air was crisp and biting, carrying the scent of snow even in midsummer, mingled with the earthy aroma of moss and lichen that carpeted the ground in resilient patches. Rivers, when not frozen solid, flowed sluggishly, their surfaces skimmed with ice flows that cracked and groaned like thunder in the night. Storms swept in from the Arctic, blanketing everything in swirling white, reducing visibility to arm's length and forcing creatures to hunker down in whatever shelter they could find. Burrows dug into snowdrifts or the lee of boulder-strewn hills. In this harsh theater, small bands of humans eked out existence on the precarious margins of these glaciers. There lives a constant negotiation with the elements. These were not vast tribes but intimate groups, perhaps a dozen or two souls bound by blood and necessity, moving nomadically across the landscape in search of sustenance. Their shelters were rudimentary yet ingenious. Hides stretched over frames of mammoth bones or driftwood, insulated with sod and snow to trap precious warmth. Inside, fires flickered from hearths fueled by scarce wood or dried dung, casting dancing shadows on faces etched with the lines of hardship. The smoke curled upward, escaping through vents to mingle with the starry night sky, where the aurora borealis painted ethereal greens and purples, a celestial spectacle that might have inspired awe or omens in their minds. Survival here demanded unceasing vigilance and adaptation. The people learned the rhythms of this frozen earth as one learns the breath of a lover, intimately, Instinctively, they observed how glaciers calved with deafening roars, birthing icebergs into frigid seas. They noted the patterns of animal migrations, caribou herds thundering across the tundra, their antlers branching like winter trees, woolly rhinoceroses plowing through snow with armored snouts, and cave bears hibernating in rocky dens, their growls a warning to any who ventured too close. Hunger was a constant companion, a gnawing ache that drove hunts into the blinding blizzards or along treacherous ice fields. Fullness, when achieved, was a brief ecstasy, shared meals of roasted meat, the fat dripping into the fire with satisfying sizzles, warming bodies from within. Emotions ran deep in this world, raw and unfiltered by the buffers of civilization. The cold was not just physical but seeped into the spirit, fostering a resilience born of necessity. Warmth was treasured, the press of bodies in a shelter during a storm, the glow of embers reflecting in wide eyes, the rare laughter shared over a successful hunt. Life and death danced in close proximity. A child born under the northern lights brought joy mingled with fear, for infancy was fragile in such climes. Elders, repositories of knowledge, recounted tales around the fire, stories of great hunts, of spirits in the wind, of ancestors who had navigated similar trials. These narratives were lifelines, weaving the group into a continuum that transcended individual mortality. The humans did not ponder grand concepts like continents or historical epics. Their worldview was grounded in the immediate, the tangible. They tracked the sun's arc, knowing when days lengthened toward summer's bounty or shortened into winter's famine. They read the land's signs, fresh tracks in snow indicating prey nearby, the crackle of thinning ice signaling danger underfoot, the bloom of berries heralding a season of gathering. Tools were extensions of their will, bone needles for sewing hides into clothing, stone scrapers for preparing skins, spears tipped with flint for piercing the thick hides of megafauna. Each artifact was crafted with care, passed down or traded, embodying the cumulative wisdom of generations. As the Ice Age persisted, subtle changes began to unfold, almost imperceptibly at first. Warmer spells allowed vegetation to encroach on glacial edges, drawing animals and, in turn, humans further into uncharted territories. The people adapted their strategies, fishing through holes in frozen lakes with hooks of bone, trapping small game in snares woven from sinew, foraging for tubers and roots buried under snow. Social bonds were crucial. Alliances formed through marriages or shared hunts, ensuring genetic diversity and mutual aid. Conflicts, when they arose, were swift and personal. Disputes over resources resolved with words or, rarely, violence. But the overriding imperative was cooperation against the greater adversary, the cold. Seasons marked the passage of time like chapters in an unwritten epic. Winter's grip was ironclad, with blizzards that howled like vengeful spirits, burying camps and testing endurance. Spring brought thaws, chaos, flooding rivers, calving ice, and the rebirth of green shoots that promised renewal. Summer's light lingered long, allowing extended hunts and gatherings, where berries stained fingers purple and fish dried on racks under the sun. Autumn signaled preparation, stockpiling food, mending gear, migrating to sheltered valleys as leaves turned russet and winds grew sharp. In this Ice Age world, humanity was forged in adversity, their spirits tempered like steel in a forge. They embodied adaptability, their movements synchronized with the planet's pulses. Though they could not foresee it, these bands were on the cusp of a profound shift, as the world's climate whispered hints of transformation. The glaciers, in their slow retreat, would unveil paths to new horizons, drawing these resilient souls toward a continent waiting in silence. Their lives, though harsh, were rich with the poetry of survival, emotions etched in every footprint left in the snow, every story told by firelight. This was the cradle of migration, where the seeds of American humanity were sown in the frozen soil of Asia's edge. As the Ice Age deepened its hold, a monumental transformation unfolded across the globe, one that would inadvertently bridge worlds separated by vast oceans. Glaciers, those colossal architects of change, expanded relentlessly, drawing immense quantities of water from the seas and locking it away in frozen fortresses miles thick. Sea levels plummeted, dropping by as much as 120 meters in some regions, exposing submerged lands that had slumbered beneath waves for millennia. This revelation was not dramatic, a sudden unveiling like a curtain drawn back, but gradual, a patient recession of the waters that reshaped coastlines and birthed new terrains. In the far north, between the easternmost reaches of Asia and the western tip of North America, a vast expanse emerged from the retreating Bering Sea, a landmass we now term Beringia, but to its eventual inhabitants, it was simply the ground beneath their feet, a natural extension of their world. Beringia was no barren, icy wasteland. It was a vibrant ecosystem, a steppe tundra teeming with life that belied the surrounding cold. Grasses waved in the winds, hardy and nutritious, interspersed with shrubs like willow and birch that provided browse for herbivores and fuel for fires. Wildflowers dotted the landscape in summer bursts, fireweed in vivid pinks, Arctic lupins nodding in blues, drawing pollinators in buzzing clouds. The soil, though often permafrost-bound, supported a mosaic of vegetation that sustained a rich fauna. Rivers meandered through this land, their banks lined with sedges and reeds, freezing in winter to form natural highways for travel. Lakes pockmarked the terrain, their surfaces mirroring the endless sky. Home to fish and waterfowl that migrated with the seasons. Animals thrived here in abundance, drawn by the forage and relative mildness compared to the glacial interiors. Mammoths roamed in family groups, their trumpets echoing across the plains as they uprooted tussocks with their trunks. Herds of steppe bison, shaggier and more robust than their modern kin, grazed in vast numbers, their dark forms creating undulating shadows on the horizon. Horses, fleet and wild, galloped in bands, evading predators like short-faced bears and packs of wolves that hunted with coordinated cunning. Giant ground sloths ambled slowly, their size a deterrent to most threats, while smaller creatures, Arctic foxes with thick fur, hares blending into snow, filled niches in this intricate web. Birds filled the skies, ptarmigans changing plumage with the seasons, eagles soaring on thermals, geese honking in V-formations during migrations that spanned continents. For the human bands that ventured onto this land, Beringia became home, not a mere passageway. Families settled for generations, perhaps unaware that they straddled what we see as two worlds. Their lives unfolded in harmony with this environment, marked by the cycles of light and dark in high latitudes, endless summer days where the sun barely dipped below the horizon, and winter nights that stretched into perpetual twilight. Shelters evolved here, dome-shaped structures of sod and bone, insulated against winds that howled like banshees across the open expanses. Fires burned brightly, fueled by dried grasses or scavenged wood, around which people gathered to share warmth, food, and stories. The air carried the tang of salt from nearby coasts, mingled with the fresh scent of thawing earth in spring. Emotions in this place were tied to the land's bounty and perils. Joy came from a successful hunt, a bison felled with spears, its meat providing sustenance for weeks, hides for clothing, bones for tools. Sorrow visited with loss, a child succumbing to the cold or a storm scattering a herd beyond reach. Fear lurked in the unknown, strange sounds in the night, perhaps the growl of a saber-toothed cat or the tremble of earth from distant quakes. Yet there was wonder too, the northern lights dancing overhead, interpreted as spirits of ancestors, inspiring rituals whispered in the dark. Human experiences deepened here, bonds formed through shared trials, love kindled in the glow of campfires, knowledge passed orally from elder to youth about edible plants, animal behaviors, and the subtle signs of weather changes. Migration across Beringia was not a deliberate exodus but a slow, organic drift. Groups followed game trails eastward, drawn by abundant pastures or escaping overcrowding. A family might move a few kilometers one season, establishing a new camp near a reliable water source. Children born on this land knew only its horizons, playing amid grass tufts, learning to track from footprints left in mud. Seasons dictated pace. Spring thaws flooded lowlands, summer allowed berry gathering and fishing in swollen rivers, autumn demanded preparation for winter's siege, when blizzards buried the world in white and forced reliance on stored provisions. This land bridge, spanning over 1,000 kilometers at its widest, was a crucible for adaptation. People honed skills, crafting atlatls for hurling darts with greater force, weaving nets from plant fibers for trapping birds, fashioning clothing from caribou hides layered for insulation. Social structures emerged informally, leaders chosen for their hunting prowess or wisdom in mediation, not hereditary right. Conflicts were rare, resolved through dialogue or relocation, as the land's vastness allowed space for all. As centuries blurred into millennia, Beringia remained a living bridge, its emergence a gift of the receding seas. The oceans, once barriers, now yielded to this terrestrial link, allowing flora, fauna, and humans to cross without fanfare. No maps charted this path. Navigation relied on stars, landmarks, and inherited lore. The retreat of the sea was a quiet revolution, reshaping destinies without proclamation. In this place, humanity lingered, thriving in a world that connected old and new, where every step eastward was a thread in the tapestry of continental peopling. The emotions of these people, hope in new horizons, resilience against hardship, echoed the land's own transformations, a prelude to the greater journey ahead. The entry into the American continents was no orchestrated expedition, no bold declaration of discovery etched in annals or marked by flags. It was a gradual, almost hesitant wandering, driven by the primal imperatives of survival rather than ambition. Picture small groups of hunters, perhaps a family clan of 10 or 12, bundled in furs against the biting wind, pausing at the edge of familiar territory, gazing eastward where the land sloped into misty valleys unknown. They followed not a vision of conquest but the trails of animals, those reliable guides whose migrations promised food and fur. A herd of caribou vanishing over a ridge might prompt a day's pursuit, leading to a new campsite by a sparkling stream. Each movement was incremental, measured in footsteps rather than miles, unfolding over generations in a rhythm as slow as the melting of glacial ice. The landscapes they encountered were diverse and awe-inspiring, a mosaic of terrains that tested and rewarded in equal measure. From the rolling tundras of Beringia, they descended into corridors flanked by retreating glaciers, vast ice-free passages like the one between the Cordilleran and Laurentide ice sheets. Here, the air was crisp with the scent of pine and wet earth, rivers rushing with meltwater that carved canyons through sedimentary rock. Summers brought fields of wildflowers, camas lilies in purple splendor, fireweed reclaiming disturbed soils, while berries ripened in thorny thickets, their juices staining lips and fingers. Winters transformed the world into a crystalline wonderland, snow blanketing hills in soft contours, forcing groups to seek shelter in caves or under overhangs where fires crackled against the cold. Emotions swirled in this odyssey. Curiosity mingled with trepidation as they crested hills to reveal new vistas, expansive plains where bison herds grazed like dark rivers, or dense forests whispering secrets in the wind. There was the thrill of discovery, like finding a valley teeming with game, evoking shouts of joy and shared feasts under starlit skies. But uncertainty loomed, storms that lashed with sleet, turning paths to mud, injuries from falls or animal encounters, treated with poultices of herbs passed down through oral tradition. Children, wide-eyed and resilient, learned early to adapt, playing games that mimicked hunts, their laughter a counterpoint to the adults' watchful silence. No maps guided them. Navigation was intuitive, reliant on celestial cues, the North Star's steady gaze, the moon's phases marking time and earthly signs, animal tracks etched in soil, the flow of rivers leading southward, the migration of birds overhead. Campfires served as beacons of continuity, around which stories unfolded, tales of ancestors' journeys, spirits inhabiting landmarks, lessons in survival. These narratives wove emotional tapestries, fostering a sense of belonging amid flux. Leadership emerged organically, an elder's wisdom in choosing routes, a hunter's skill in tracking, respected without formal hierarchy. As they ventured deeper, the world shifted subtly. Coastal routes offered bounties of shellfish and seals, waves crashing against rocky shores with rhythmic thunder, fog rolling in like ethereal veils. Inland paths led through mountain passes where eagles soared, their cries piercing the thin air, and hot springs bubbled with mineral warmth, providing rare comfort. Seasons dictated pace. Spring's floods swelling rivers, summer's light extending days for travel, autumn's harvest of nuts and roots stockpiling for winter's halt in sheltered groves. Human experiences deepened in isolation, bonds forged in shared hardships, love blooming in quiet moments by firelight, grief over losses to exposure or predators. They adapted tools, sharpening stones into blades for skinning, crafting baskets from reeds for carrying. Ideas spread through encounters with other groups, bartering knowledge as much as goods. Over centuries, these small steps accumulated into profound migration, peopling a continent without intent. The unknown became familiar, valleys named in forgotten tongues, landscapes imprinted on memory. This walking was humanity's quiet epic, emotions raw in every stride, hope, fear, wonder, transforming wanderers into inhabitants of a new world. Over the expanse of time, as these migrant groups settled into the rhythms of the American landscapes, they underwent a subtle yet profound metamorphosis. Evolving from Asian wanderers into something uniquely forged by this new world. They became the first Americans, though they would have identified themselves by clan names or totems lost to history, perhaps invoking the spirit of the eagle or the enduring mammoth. Historians label them Paleo-Indians, a term that captures their antiquity but not the vibrancy of their lives. These people lived in small, kin-based bands, rarely exceeding a few dozen individuals, where every member was integral to the group's survival. Isolation in this vast continent meant death. Cooperation was the thread that bound them, woven through daily acts of sharing and support. Imagine a typical band, extended families connected by blood and marriage, moving seasonally across terrains that ranged from arid deserts to lush river valleys. Their shelters were portable and ingenious, skins draped over wooden frames or natural caves enhanced with windbreaks of stone and sod. Inside, the air was thick with the smells of cooking meat, herbal remedies, and the earthy tang of hides. Fires burned at the center, not just for warmth but as communal hearts where elders spun tales under flickering light, passing on knowledge of stars, plants, and beasts. Children listened wide-eyed, absorbing lessons that would one day save their lives, while adults mended tools or prepared food, their hands calloused from labor. Emotions defined their existence, the fierce protectiveness of parents shielding young from predators or cold, the deep sorrow of burying a kin in shallow graves marked by stones, the joy of birth celebrated with songs and feasts. Leadership was fluid and merit-based. A skilled hunter might guide during migrations, a wise woman mediate disputes or divine omens from dreams. Respect flowed from demonstrated ability, tracking a herd through snow, healing wounds with poultices of willow bark, or crafting flint points with precision. Power was not hoarded but distributed, ensuring harmony in groups where discord could prove fatal. The landscapes they inhabited shaped their identities, lingering in their stories and rituals. In the Great Plains, winds swept across endless grasses, carrying seeds and scents that evoked freedom and vastness. Forests of the East were dense labyrinths, canopies filtering light into emerald glows, home to deer and berries that sustained them. Coasts offered the ocean's bounty, waves whispering eternal cycles, while mountains challenged with steep ascents rewarded with panoramic views. Seasons imprinted emotions. Spring's renewal bringing hope with blooming flowers, summer's abundance fostering communal gatherings, autumn's crisp air urging preparation, winter's hush demanding introspection by firesides. Human experiences were immersive and sensory. The crunch of snow under moccasins, the taste of fresh-killed game roasted over coals, the sting of wind on exposed skin. They hunted in coordinated teams, hearts pounding with adrenaline as they closed on prey, trusting each other as vital as weapons. Gathering was women's domain often, foraging for roots like camas or nuts from piñon trees, their knowledge of edible plants a lifeline. Injuries were tended with care, using sinew for sutures or splints from branches, reflecting a compassion born of interdependence. Over generations, these people developed distinct cultures, adapting to local ecologies. In some regions, they fished with bone hooks in rushing rivers. In others, they trapped small game in snares. Art emerged subtly, engravings on tools depicting animals, perhaps for luck or memory. Spirituality infused daily life, seeing spirits in natural phenomena, honoring them with offerings or dances. By becoming American, they embodied resilience, their identities rooted in the land's diversity. This birth was not marked by fanfare but by quiet adaptation, laying foundations for future peoples. Their story was one of transformation, emotions intertwined with the continent's pulse, fear conquered by courage, loss balanced by community, wonder at the world's beauty sustaining them through trials. Among the most remarkable legacies of these early Americans was their profound mastery of stone technology, a craft that blended artistry, precision, and inherited wisdom into tools that were nothing short of lifelines. They shaped rock with a finesse that modern eyes might mistake for machine work, chipping away at flint, chert, or obsidian to create edges sharper than any blade today. This was no crude hacking but a deliberate process, passed orally from master to apprentice around campfires where the air hung heavy with the scent of smoke and earth. Imagine a hunter, fingers deft and calloused, striking a core stone with a hammer of antler flakes flying like sparks, each blow calculated to form points balanced for flight and deadly on impact. The Clovis tradition emerged as a pinnacle of this expertise, named for the New Mexico site where their distinctive spear points were first unearthed. These artifacts, fluted with channels for hafting onto shafts, appeared across vast distances, from the plains of North America to the edges of South America, whispering of ideas that traveled through trade or migration, even as people moved slowly. Crafting a Clovis point was a ritual of patience, selecting raw material from riverbeds or outcrops, napping it into shape over hours, the rhythmic tap-tap echoing like a heartbeat. The finished product gleamed, its symmetry a testament to skill, used not just for hunting but as symbols of prowess. Hunting itself was a symphony of coordination, courage, and trust, where failure courted starvation and success bonded the group. Targeting megafauna like mammoths required strategy, scouts tracking herds by footprints or dung, signaling with calls mimicking birds. The approach was stealthy, hearts racing in the chill air, spears at the ready. A drive might involve funneling animals into ambushes, using fire or noise to panic them. The kill was visceral, the thud of points piercing hide, the beast's roar fatting into silence, blood steaming on snow. Then came the butchering, a communal effort where every part was utilized. Meat for food, bones for tools, sinew for thread, hides for shelter. Emotions surged in these moments. Adrenaline's rush during the chase, triumph's elation in a successful take, grief if a companion fell to tusks or hooves. Seasons influenced hunts, summer's long days allowing extended pursuits, winter's scarcity demanding efficiency. Landscapes added layers. Plains offered visibility for spotting herds, forests required quieter stalking amid rustling leaves. This mastery extended beyond stone to the hunt's ecology, understanding animal behaviors, mammoth social structures, bison stampedes as intimately as family. Tools evolved, atlatls amplifying throw force, nets for smaller prey. Knowledge was experiential, learned through trial, scars marking lessons. In this era, stone and hunt were intertwined with human experience, forging identities resilient and ingenious. The Clovis points, buried in earth, tell a story of innovation that spread like wildfire, quietly revolutionizing survival in a new world. In the world of the first Americans, life teetered perpetually on the edge of death, a delicate balance where every dawn brought uncertainty and every nightfall a reprieve earned through vigilance. Storms could descend without warning, howling winds tearing at shelters, rain or snow infiltrating every crevice, forcing huddles around sputtering fires for survival. Injuries, a twisted ankle on rocky terrain, a gash from a thorn or beast, could fester into fatal infections, treated with limited remedies like chewed leaves or poultices, their efficacy reliant on ancestral knowledge. Failed hunts meant empty bellies, the gnaw of hunger weakening bodies and spirits, children crying in the dark as elders rationed meager stores. Yet amid this fragility, beauty flourished in poignant contrasts. Firelight danced on stone tools, illuminating faces etched with stories, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of resilience. Stories unfolded under open skies, voices rising and falling like the wind, recounting hunts, dreams, and legends that connected past to present. Knowledge flowed like rivers from generation to generation. How to read clouds for weather, identify poisonous plants, or navigate by stars. Each lesson a thread in the fabric of survival. Emotions were vivid. Fear in the roar of a predator, joy in a child's first steps, sorrow in farewells to the departed. Human experiences were immersive, the warmth of a shared hide blanket, the taste of wild honey rare and sweet, the sting of cold on bare skin. They did not dominate nature but lived within its embrace, respecting its power through rituals, offerings to spirits in rivers, dances mimicking animals to ensure bountiful hunts. Seasons amplified this closeness. Spring's floods threatening camps. Summer's heat breeding insects, autumn's chill urging preparation, winter's isolation fostering introspection. Communities cared for the vulnerable, sharing food and labor, isolation spelling doom. This existence honed adaptability, turning peril into strength, beauty into sustenance. Life close to death was not mere endurance but a profound engagement with existence, where every moment pulsed with intensity. As the centuries waned, the Ice Age's iron grip began to loosen, ushering in an era of transformation that reshaped the American continents and the lives entwined with them. Temperatures rose gradually, glaciers retreating like defeated armies, releasing meltwater that swelled rivers and filled basins with new lakes. Forests expanded their domains, creeping into former tundras with saplings of spruce and pine, their needles scenting the air with resinous freshness. Grasslands shifted, some drying into steppes while others bloomed with diverse flora, attracting pollinators in humming swarms. The great megafauna, mammoths with their curving tusks, mastodons browsing in woodlands, began to vanish, their herds thinning under the dual pressures of climate shifts and human hunting. Whether overhunting tipped the scale or environmental changes sealed their fate, the old world faded, leaving bones scattered like omens on the plains. Humans, ever adaptable, pivoted. Spears once aimed at giants now targeted deer, elk, or rabbits, hunts becoming more frequent but less perilous. Fishing gained prominence, with weirs in rivers trapping salmon runs, their silver bodies leaping in spawning frenzies. Gathering intensified, women and children foraging for tubers, seeds, and fruits, acorns ground into meal, berries preserved in fat, diversifying diets. Emotions accompanied this flux, bewilderment at disappearing animals, perhaps interpreted as spiritual displeasure, leading to new rituals. Relief came with easier survival, joy in abundant smaller game. Landscapes evolved, coasts rising as seas stabilized, valleys greening with vegetation, offering new homes. Seasons softened but retained power. Longer summers for exploration, milder winters reducing mortality. Tools adapted, finer points for small prey, grinding stones for plants. This adaptability became humanity's hallmark, turning change into opportunity, ensuring continuity amid transformation. Slowly, inexorably, human presence spread across the American continents, a diffusion as natural as rivers finding the sea. From northern tundras, groups ventured southward along coasts where seals barked on rocky shores, or inland through passes flanked by snow-capped peaks. The Great Plains became thoroughfares, bison trails guiding migrations across undulating grasses swaying under vast skis. Eastern forests, thick with oak and maple, sheltered bands adapting to woodland life, hunting deer amid rustling leaves scented with humus. Central America funneled them through isthmuses, humid jungles alive with parrots' calls and monkeys' chatter, rivers teeming with fish. Southward, the Andes rose as challenges, high altitudes testing endurance with thin air, rewarded with valleys rich in quinoa and potatoes. The Amazon's dense canopy, a green labyrinth humming with insects, demanded new skills in navigation and foraging. Patagonian steppes, windswept and stark, hosted hardy souls chasing guanacos. By 8000 BCE, humans inhabited nearly every niche, from Arctic inlets to equatorial rainforests, Andean heights to pampas plains. Adaptations varied. Coastal fishers crafting canoes from dugout logs, highland dwellers domesticating llamas, forest peoples building thatched huts. Emotions drove expansion. Curiosity for new lands, pressure from growing populations, pursuit of resources. Seasons influenced movements. Dry periods pushing toward water, wet seasons enabling travel. Interactions sparked, trade in obsidian or shells, alliances through marriage, occasional conflicts resolved swiftly. This filling was a tapestry of human ingenuity, transforming a silent continent into a mosaic of lives, setting stages for future civilizations. The genesis of American history resides not in monumental edifices or imperial conquests, but in the quiet virtues of patience, courage, and perpetual motion that defined these first peoples. Their story underscores how small acts, a step into the unknown, a tool crafted by firelight, can alter destinies on continental scales. They were travelers, not conquerors, their migrations a testament to human adaptability without the hubris of domination. This beginning matters because it roots all subsequent narratives in humility and resilience, reminding us that civilizations rise from foundations of survival and harmony with nature. Their legacy endures in the diversity of indigenous cultures, in the land's very contours shaped by their presence. Understanding this era fosters appreciation for the depth of human experience, where emotions and landscapes intertwine to forge history. The transition from the waning Ice Age to the Holocene epoch marked one of the most profound environmental shifts in the Americas' history. As the Pleistocene's Great Cold finally loosened its hold around 11,700 years ago, the continent exhaled into a softer, more temperate world. Glaciers, once vast and unyielding, retreated northward and upward into mountain ranges, their meltwaters feeding swollen rivers that meandered across broader floodplains, depositing rich silt that nourished new vegetation. Snowlines climbed higher, exposing valleys and plateaus that had been locked in ice for millennia. The air grew milder. The wind, though still carrying a bite in winter, no longer sliced through flesh with the same lethal precision. Forests, previously confined to sheltered refugia, began their slow, inexorable advance, conifers giving way to broadleaf trees in the east, pines and oaks spreading into former tundra zones, leaf by leaf, season by season. This Holocene warming was not uniform. In North America, the younger Dryas, a brief return to cold conditions around 700 years ago, had delayed the thaw, but once it ended, temperatures rose steadily, creating conditions more hospitable to diverse plant and animal life. In the Andes and Mesoamerica, similar patterns unfolded, with higher elevations becoming viable for settlement as permafrost thawed and precipitation patterns shifted toward more reliable rainfall in some regions. Rivers that once ran in narrow, ice-choked channels now wandered freely, carving oxbows and creating wetlands teeming with fish, birds, and edible plants. The landscape breathed differently. Colors softened from stark whites and grays to greens, browns, and golds. Sounds multiplied with the rustle of new foliage and the calls of returning migratory birds. For the people who had survived by constant movement, following herds across open plains, enduring brutal winters in temporary camps, this change was profoundly unsettling. The old giants were vanishing. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats, whose thunderous presence had defined the landscape and the rhythm of hunts, faded from the earth. Whether driven by overhunting, rapid climate shifts altering habitats, or a combination, the megafauna extinctions left a void. The great communal drives that once united bands in exhilarating, dangerous pursuits became memories recounted around fires. Stories of ancestors spearing colossal beasts persisted, but the reality was a quieter world. In place of these titans came smaller, more abundant animals. Deer, rabbits, turkeys, and bison in reformed herds adapted to the new grasslands and forests. Plant life flourished, nuts from oaks and hickories, berries in thickets, tubers in moist soils, and wild grasses whose seeds could be gathered in quantity. Growing seasons lengthened in many regions, allowing more time for foraging without the constant threat of starvation during prolonged freezes. The promise was immense, a land that could sustain life with less relentless movement. Yet this softer world posed a quiet crossroads. The mobility that had ensured survival in the Ice Age, light camps, portable tools, intimate knowledge of vast territories, now felt mismatched with the emerging abundance. Groups could continue the ancestral pattern of endless wandering, chasing seasonal resources across widening landscapes, or they could experiment with remaining, anchoring themselves to places where plants returned reliably, where rivers offered fish year-round, where the soil held promise. This choice was not made in grand councils or with proclamations. It emerged from daily observations, from the slow accumulation of experience across generations. Emotions ran deep in this era of transition. There was grief for the lost world, the thunder of mammoth herds replaced by the soft patter of deer, the exhilaration of high-stakes hunts giving way to patient gathering. But there was also wonder at the new bounty, the sight of forests reclaiming valleys once barren, the taste of richer, more varied foods, the security of knowing a favorite berry patch would bloom again next year. Fear lingered. Would the old patterns fail entirely? Yet hope flickered in the lengthening days and the earth's renewed generosity. In regions like the eastern woodlands, people intensified use of nuts and riverine resources, building semi-permanent camps near reliable oak groves. In the southwest, adaptations to drier conditions led to broader foraging. In Mesoamerica and the Andes, the stage was set for the first tentative steps toward cultivation. The land, once indifferent or hostile, now seemed to invite partnership. This Holocene softening was humanity's invitation to pause, to observe, to begin the long journey toward staying. The crossroads was not dramatic. It was subtle, patient, and ultimately transformative, setting the foundation for everything that would follow in the Americas' deep history. The shift toward agriculture in the Americas was not a sudden revelation or a deliberate invention marked by a single brilliant moment. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, as people who had long gathered wild plants deepened their attention to the natural world around them. For thousands of years, women and men had foraged seasonally, digging tubers in spring, collecting berries in summer, harvesting nuts in fall, relying on intimate knowledge of where plants grew, when they ripened, and how to prepare them. But in the warmer, wetter Holocene, patterns became more predictable. Some plants returned faithfully to the same sunny slopes or riverbanks year after year. Others, when seeds were accidentally dropped near campsites during processing or consumption, sprouted in disturbed soil enriched by human waste and ash. This was not yet farming in any modern sense. No plowed fields, no irrigation canals. It was simply heightened observation, noticing that certain grasses produced fuller seed heads when competing vegetation was cleared by foot traffic or fire, that tubers grew larger in loose, fertile soil near middens, that fruits on plants near regular paths seemed sweeter or more abundant. No one coined terms like domestication or cultivation. They simply favored the best, selecting larger seeds for carrying back to camp, returning to promising spots, discarding or eating poorer specimens. Over generations, this attention accumulated into knowledge. In the Balsas River Valley of southern Mexico, wild teosinte, a grass with tiny, brittle seed heads, began to be reshaped. People selected variants with larger cobs, softer glooms, and more kernels, planting them near camps or in naturally disturbed areas. By around 6700 BCE, early maize appeared, its ears larger and more productive, though still far from modern corn. Squash, one of the first domesticated plants in the Americas, emerged around 10,000–8000 BCE, with larger fruits and seeds better suited for storage and consumption. In the high Andes, wild potatoes were nurtured. People learned which tubers were safe. Some wild varieties contained toxic alkaloids, which tasted better, and how to propagate them by replanting eyes or tubers. By 8000–5000 BCE, domesticated potatoes offered reliable calories in harsh elevations. Beans, chilies, and avocados followed similar paths in Mesoamerica, while in the Amazon lowlands, manioc cassava was domesticated by 7000 BCE, its starchy roots providing sustenance in tropical soils. This process was fragile and patient. Knowledge was passed orally, mothers showing daughters which plants to favor, elders explaining why certain seeds were saved. Mistakes were costly. A poor selection could yield meager harvests, teaching through trial and error. Yet the land responded. Plants near human activity grew in greater density, with traits humans valued: larger size, better taste, easier processing, becoming more common. Emotions intertwined with this learning. Satisfaction in a bountiful patch, anxiety when a favored plant failed, wonder at how the earth seemed to listen to careful hands. Diets diversified, reducing reliance on unpredictable game. Tools adapted, grinding stones for seeds, baskets for carrying, digging sticks for tubers. Camps returned seasonally, not as necessity but as choice. This language of plants was spoken slowly, in lifetimes rather than years, but it transformed human existence. From mere gatherers, people became partners with the land, coaxing abundance from the soil in ways that would echo through millennia. As knowledge of plants deepened, seasonal camps evolved into something more enduring. No longer did families dismantle every shelter after a hunt or harvest. Instead, they left behind heavy tools, grinding stones, mortars, that were cumbersome to carry but invaluable in place. Shelters of wood, thatch, and mud were repaired rather than abandoned, their frames reinforced against wind and rain. Children grew up learning the same river bends, the same hill contours, the same arc of the sun across the sky, forging a sense of place that ancestors had rarely known. This was not yet full village life, no clustered houses, no formal boundaries, but the beginning of rooted memory. In the Tehuacan Valley of Mexico, sites like Gilanaquitz reveal early evidence of repeated occupation, with squash seeds showing signs of domestication around 10,000 years ago. People returned to caves and open-air camps, storing seeds and tools, waiting for plants to mature. In the Andes, high valleys saw similar patterns, with potato cultivation encouraging longer stays near suitable soils. The experiments were tentative. A group might overwinter in a fertile floodplain, finding that stored nuts and dried fish sustained them through lean months. Another might clear brush around a wild maize patch, noticing improved yields the following year. These choices were driven by practicality. Why move when resources returned reliably? Yet they required courage, abandoning the proven mobility for the risk of staying. Social dynamics shifted subtly. Shared labor in maintaining camps strengthened bonds. Children played in familiar dirt, learning local ecology deeply. Burials near camps tied ancestors to the land, their spirits watching over the living. Emotions were complex. Comfort in familiarity, unease at reduced mobility, pride in coaxing life from soil. By 5000–3000 BCE, these experiments laid foundations for permanence, transforming wanderers into dwellers. For the Ice Age hunters who roamed the vast, unforgiving landscapes of the Americas during the late Pleistocene, time was a relentless, immediate force, an unbroken present defined by the urgent imperatives of survival. The world moved in sharp binary contrasts: hunt now or starve tonight, move now or freeze in the deepening snow, seize the fleeting warmth of a carcass or face the gnawing hunger that could claim the weak within days. Their days were measured not in calendars or cycles, but in the raw pulse of need and opportunity. A herd of mammoths might appear on the horizon at dawn, demanding instant coordination, spears readied, hearts pounding in unison. A sudden storm could force a hasty retreat to shelter, where families huddled around meager fires, sharing the last scraps of dried meat. There was little room for long-term planning beyond the next sunrise. Foresight extended perhaps to the next season's migration routes, learned through hard-won experience and passed orally from elder to youth. Life was lived in the now, with the past echoing in stories around the fire and the future, a hazy continuation of the same struggle. This immediacy shaped their psychology profoundly. Impulsiveness was not a flaw but a virtue. Quick decisions meant life. Hesitation could mean death. The emotional landscape was vivid and visceral. The adrenaline surge of the chase, the raw joy of a successful kill when bellies filled and laughter rang through the camp, the crushing despair when a hunt failed and children cried from hunger. Stories told of great ancestors who acted boldly, who read the wind or the tracks in snow with uncanny instinct. Time felt linear in the sense of endless forward motion. Move, hunt, survive, repeat, without the weight of anticipation stretching far beyond the next moon or the turning of leaves. Then came the Holocene warming, the great thaw that softened the world after around 11,700 years ago. Glaciers retreated, seas stabilized, forests expanded, and the megafauna vanished, leaving behind a landscape of greater abundance but also new demands. Smaller game multiplied: deer, rabbits, turkeys, while wild plants flourished with longer growing seasons and more reliable rains. Humans, ever adaptable, began to linger longer in promising places, gathering seeds, roots, and berries with increasing intent. This shift did not happen overnight. It unfolded over millennia. From the Archaic period onward, roughly 8,000–2,000 BCE in many regions, as people experimented with staying rather than endless wandering. The emerging agricultural world stretched time into longer, more deliberate horizons. Plants, unlike fleeing animals, could not be pursued. They had to be tended, waited for, anticipated. A seed planted in haste might rot in dry soil or be washed away by unseasonal floods. Patience, observation, and memory became the new imperatives. The cycle of growth demanded foresight, remembering which wild grasses produced the fullest heads the previous year, saving those seeds, returning to the same disturbed patches near camps where accidental sprouts had thrived. In the Tehuacan Valley or the Balsas River region, early cultivators of teosinte, the wild ancestor of maize, learned to favor variants with larger cobs and softer glooms, planting them in fertile spots and protecting them from pests. This required holding knowledge across seasons, marking the spot with stones, noting the position of the sun at planting time, observing how moon phases or cloud patterns signaled coming rains. Seasons, once background noise to the hunt, gained profound, almost sacred meaning. The sky became a vast ledger of signs, stars wheeling overhead, moon phases waxing and waning, cloud formations drifting from west to east. Rain transitioned from mere weather to life itself, a gift from unseen forces when it arrived in abundance, a curse when it failed or came too early or too late. In the monsoon-driven environments of Mesoamerica, fall starts to the rainy season were treacherous. Planting too soon after a deceptive shower could doom the crop to wither. Accurate timing was critical, demanding careful observation of the horizon where the sun rose and set, aligning with natural markers like mountain peaks or the first flowering of certain plants. This temporal shift reshaped human psychology in deep ways. Impulsiveness yielded to foresight. The quick strike of the spear gave way to the slow, deliberate act of sowing. Waiting became as vital as action. A seed required days, weeks, months to germinate, grow, and ripen. Anxiety crept in, not from immediate threats like a predator in the night, but from prolonged uncertainty. Would the rains come? Would pests devour the young shoots? Would frost arrive early? Yet this waiting also bred anticipation. The quiet thrill of watching green shoots emerge from soil, the growing excitement as ears of maize swelled. Gratitude deepened when cycles succeeded, expressed in early rituals, offerings of the first harvest to spirits of rain and earth, songs sung to coax fertility. In Mesoamerica, where maize cultivation intensified from around 6700 BCE onward, precise timing became essential. Planting aligned with the first reliable rains, often in late spring, March to May in later Aztec practices, but rooted in earlier patterns, after the danger of winter frosts passed, but before the heavy summer deluges. Weeding followed in the growing months, protecting the crop from encroaching plants or animals. Harvest came before autumn frosts or rot set in. The 260-day ritual calendar, emerging as early as 1150 BCE in some architectural alignments, intermeshed with the 365-day solar year, reflecting not just astronomy but the practical needs of maize growth, from planting to maturity. Day signs and numbers guided auspicious moments, turning time into a living, divine force. In the high Andes, potato cycles aligned with altitude, frost, and seasonal moisture. Domestication began around 8,000 years ago near Lake Titicaca, with ancient farmers learning to propagate tubers by replanting eyes in terraced fields. Cycles varied by elevation. Lower valleys allowed multiple plantings, while higher zones demanded careful timing to avoid killing frosts. Early and big plantings, Moe and Hatantarpe, divided the year, with harvests staggered to ensure year-round supply. Freeze-drying techniques Chunyo preserved surplus, extending time's reach into winter scarcity. Time became cyclical, tied to renewal. Plant in the wet season, harvest in the dry, rest the soil in rotation, honor the earth with offerings. This new relationship with time fostered deeper emotional lives. Anticipation of abundance colored dreams and stories. Thales now emphasized planning, observation, the wisdom of elders who remembered past cycles. Anxiety over delays or failures grew, but so did communal gratitude for successful harvests, shared in feasts and rituals. Stories shifted from heroic individual feats to collective endurance, from the thrill of the hunt to the quiet satisfaction of fields ripening under watchful eyes. Calendars emerged informally at first, marking trees with notches, noting bird migrations or solstices, tracking the sun's zenith passages. These were practical tools, but also spiritual ones, linking human efforts to cosmic rhythms. In time, they would evolve into the sophisticated systems of the Maya, Aztec, and Inca, interlocking cycles of 260 and 365 days, used for divination, warfare, and agriculture alike. But their roots lay in this archaic transformation. Ultimately, the move from immediate to extended time horizons marked a profound evolution in human experience. Hunter-gatherers lived in a world of sharp, present-tense intensity. Early agriculturalists entered a realm of patience, memory, and cyclical renewal. Emotions grew more layered, fear tempered by hope, joy rooted in anticipation, sorrow deepened by investment in fragile growth. This shift was not without cost. Work often intensified, leisure diminished in some cases. Inequalities emerged with stored surplus. Yet it opened the door to permanence, to villages, to the intricate civilizations that would follow. Time, once a fleeting enemy to outrun, became an ally to understand, shape, and honor, a transformation as monumental as the domestication of the plants themselves. The Archaic period, spanning roughly from 8,000 to 1,000 BCE across much of the Americas, represents one of the longest and most transformative eras in pre-Columbian history. Historians and archaeologists apply this label to capture a widespread shift from the earlier Paleo-Indian focus on big game hunting amid a cooling, glacial world, to a more flexible, diverse adaptation in a warming Holocene landscape. Yet for the people living through these millennia, there was nothing archaic or outdated about their existence. Life grew steadily more intricate, layered with new skills, refined technologies, and deepening social connections. The era was not a step backward into simplicity, but a dynamic unfolding of complexity born from close observation of changing environments, experimentation with resources, and the quiet accumulation of knowledge passed across generations. The most striking change was in diets, which expanded dramatically beyond the meat-heavy focus of earlier times. As the megafauna, mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, faded away due to climate shifts and possibly human pressure, people turned to a broader spectrum of foods. Small game became central. Deer, rabbits, turkeys, squirrels, and birds, hunted with precision in forests and plains. Rivers, lakes, and coasts yielded fish, shellfish, and waterfowl, often in seasonal abundance. Plants rose in importance. Wild seeds, roots, tubers, berries, and especially nuts like hickory, acorn, walnut, and chestnut in the eastern woodlands. These provided reliable calories, storable for lean seasons, and required intensive processing. In many regions, shellfish middens, vast piles of discarded shells, grew into permanent landscape features, marking repeated visits to productive estuaries. By the late Archaic, some groups in Mesoamerica began tentative cultivation of squash, beans, maize from teosinte, and other plants, though full agriculture emerged later. This dietary breadth reduced risk. A poor hunt could be offset by gathered nuts or dried fish, fostering resilience and population growth. Tools diversified in response, reflecting hands increasingly skilled in multiple materials. Chipped stone persisted, flint knappers crafted notched and stemmed projectile points for spears, evolving from earlier lanceolets, but ground stone tools proliferated. Manos and metates, handstones and grinding slabs, pulverized seeds and nuts into meal. Mortars and pestles pounded acorns or roots. Digging sticks, often tipped with stone or hardened wood, unearthed tubers. Baskets woven from plant fibers like cane, yucca, or willow carried harvests, stored food, and even served in cooking. Heated stones dropped into water-filled baskets. The atlatl or spear thrower, a wooden handle with a hook, amplified throwing power, allowing hunters to launch darts farther and with greater force than by hand alone. Weights, often polished stone, steadied these tools, turning them into extensions of the arm. In some areas, like the Great Lakes, early copperworking produced awls. Knives and ornaments. Hands that once focused on flint now shaped wood into handles, fiber into cordage, and clay into early containers in some southern regions. This toolkit was portable yet specialized, balancing mobility with efficiency. People still hunted seasonally, following deer migrations in fall or fish runs in spring, but movement now had anchors, base camps near reliable resources like nut groves, springs, or river confluences. These were not permanent villages yet, but semi-permanent places revisited year after year. Rock shelters and caves offered protection, their floors layered with artifacts and hearths. In the eastern woodlands, nut gathering intensified around oak-hickory forests. Sites like those in the Ohio Valley or Tennessee River show heavy processing of acorns and hickory nuts, with charred shells attesting to roasting and grinding. Groups might camp in uplands for nuts in autumn, then descend to river bottoms for shellfish in winter. In the Southwest, aridity challenged adaptation, but traditions like the Ashara or Cochise emphasized broad foraging in varied terrains, with early evidence of plant tending. The Great Plains saw bison-focused strategies, though drought periods thinned herds. In Mesoamerica, sites in the Tehuacan Valley reveal early squash domestication and seed saving, while Andean groups nurtured potatoes in high valleys. Knowledge deepened through meticulous observation and oral transmission. Elders taught the timing of nut ripening, the best spots for shellfish beds, the signs of approaching game. Children learned by doing, helping weave baskets, nap points, or grind seeds, embedding skills into muscle memory. This era saw the beginnings of environmental management. Controlled burns cleared underbrush to encourage nut trees or game browse, subtly shaping landscapes. Socially, cooperation increased, becoming the glue of survival. Processing large nut hauls or shellfish harvests demanded shared labor. Women and children often gathered and prepared plants. Men hunted, but tasks overlapped. Defending camps from predators or rival groups required vigilance and mutual trust. Bands remained small, kin-based, egalitarian, but interactions grew. Trade networks exchanged shell beads, copper, or stone across regions. Burials, sometimes with grave goods, suggest emerging beliefs about the afterlife and social ties. Life balanced mobility with attachment. Seasonal rounds provided variety, while anchored camps offered familiarity, a sense of place and continuity. Emotions in this world were rich and grounded. The satisfaction of a full basket after a day of gathering, the camaraderie of communal grinding around a fire, the quiet pride in crafting a perfectly balanced atlatl, these moments built community. Anxiety lingered in lean seasons, but the diversity of resources offered hope. Joy came from successful hunts or abundant harvests shared in feasts. Wonder at the world's renewal, forests thickening, rivers teeming, permeated daily life. By the late Archaic, around 3000–1000 BCE, complexity accelerated. Population grew. Some groups settled year-round near rich resources, experimenting with pottery in the southeast or more intensive plant use. Trade flourished, ideas spread, and the foundations for woodland and later civilizations were laid. Yet throughout, the archaic way was one of adaptation, ingenuity, and harmony with the land. Far from simple, it was a vibrant tapestry of human experience, diverse diets fueling stronger bodies, varied tools empowering hands, anchored movements creating roots, and deepening cooperation, weaving people together. This era bridged the nomadic past to the settled future, its intricacies echoing through the millennia that followed. The birth of villages in the ancient Americas marked a profound turning point in human history, one that unfolded slowly over centuries during the later phases of the Archaic period, roughly 5000–1000 BCE in many regions. What had once been fluid, seasonally mobile bands of hunter-gatherers began to anchor themselves to specific places that offered sustained abundance. Certain landscapes proved too vital to abandon. Fertile floodplains where rivers deposited rich silt year after year, reliable springs that bubbled clear water even in dry seasons, wind-protected valleys shielded by natural ridges, and coastal estuaries teeming with shellfish and fish. These locations became magnets for human settlement, drawing people back repeatedly until temporary camps evolved into something more enduring, clusters of homes that formed the first true villages. The architecture reflected this shift toward permanence. Houses were no longer hasty lean-tos of hides or branches. They became sturdier structures of wood frames, thatch roofs, and mud-plastered walls. In many regions, they took oval or rectangular forms, with central hearths for cooking and warmth, floors of packed earth or clay, and sometimes storage pits dug into the ground for surplus food. These dwellings clustered together organically, paths worn between them by daily foot traffic, shared open spaces emerging where people gathered to process food, repair tools, or simply converse under the evening sky. The result was a new kind of human landscape, a settlement that breathed with collective life, where smoke rose from multiple hearths at once, children played in familiar dirt, and the rhythms of daily routine tied people to place rather than to endless movement. One of the most striking examples comes from the Valdivia culture along the Pacific coast of Ecuador, flourishing from around 3500 BCE to 1500 BCE. This culture represents one of the earliest settled societies in the Americas, with villages that signal a decisive transition from nomadic foraging to semi-sedentary life. The Rio Alto site in the Shandai Valley stands as a pinnacle of this development. Spanning over 30 acres in its middle Valdivia phase, roughly 2300–1850 BCE, Rio Alto grew into a large, organized community of perhaps 1,250 inhabitants. Early houses were small, single-roomed, ovoid to rectangular structures with post-supported mud walls and thatched roofs, each featuring a central hearth for cooking and daily activities like stone tool making and cotton spinning. Burials near these homes, sometimes accompanied by small stone anthropomorphic figurines, tied the living to their dead in familiar ground. By the Middle Valdivia period, the site transformed dramatically. Domestic structures increased in number and size, some large enough for extended families of 8 to 10 people, indicating shifts toward multi-generational households. The overall layout became a vast rectangle or oval opening to the south, divided by low earthen mounds into two plazas, a smaller inner one and a larger outer one. Atop these mounds stood structures likely ceremonial, though they may have doubled as elite residences. This U-shaped or concentric arrangement, with domestic houses mimicking the site's form, created a central ceremonial precinct surrounded by living spaces. Rio Alto functioned not just as a village but as a regional center, where people gathered for rituals, trade, and social events. Artifacts like delicate red and gray pottery, polished stone tools, and unique Venus figurines, slender ceramic females with distinct hairstyles, often holding their breasts or chin, suggest symbolic and possibly spiritual dimensions to community life. The Valdivia people relied on fishing, supplemented by early cultivation of maize, beans, squash, cassava, chili peppers, and cotton spun into textiles, creating a stable economic base that supported year-round occupation. Far to the north, in the American Southeast, another pathway to village life emerged through the exploitation of coastal and estuarine resources. Shell middens, vast accumulations of discarded mollusk shells, bones, and artifacts, supported year-round or semi-permanent settlements during the late Archaic, around 5,000–3,000 years ago. These middens, often circular or semicircular shell rings, formed when communities repeatedly dumped waste in the same locations near productive oyster beds, fish runs, and marshlands. Sites in Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida, such as those along the barrier islands, show that these rings were deliberate constructions, not mere trash heaps. Some reached monumental proportion, with multiple rings or associated sand mounds, housing sizable populations who exploited the rich intertidal zones. Evidence from places like the Lighthouse Point and Sapelo Island sites in South Carolina indicates year-round occupation. Shells from different seasons suggest continuous harvesting, while artifacts and features point to sustained activity. In Florida, sites like Horace Island featured large shell-ensemble mounds dated to around 4,874–270 BP, supporting communities that built stable, flood-resistant platforms. These settlements were home to complex hunter-gatherers who created pottery, engaged in trade, and constructed monuments, traits usually linked to later agricultural societies. The middens provided elevated, well-drained living surfaces, while the surrounding wetlands offered fish, shellfish, waterfowl, and plants year-round, with minimal seasonality due to the moderating ocean influence. With the emergence of these clustered settlements came entirely new social dynamics. Villages introduced persistent questions that had rarely arisen in mobile bands. Who controls the stored food, nuts, dried fish, seeds, accumulated in pits or baskets through collective labor? Who decides when to plant or harvest emerging crops, or when to burn fields to encourage growth? Who resolves disputes over space, resources, or partnerships? Social life thickened dramatically. Alliances formed through marriages, shared rituals, or trade. Conflicts arose over access to prime spots and had to be mediated to prevent division. Cooperation became not occasional but essential, building houses, maintaining paths, defending against predators or rivals, processing large hauls of shellfish or nuts. This thickening of relationships deepened emotional lives in ways both comforting and tense. A profound sense of belonging to place took root. The same river bend seen in childhood and adulthood, the familiar smell of smoke from neighboring hearths, the security of knowing kin and allies were nearby. Yet tension simmered over resources. Surplus food that could be stored through lean times also invited envy or hoarding. Power dynamics shifted subtly. Those with skill in negotiation, ritual knowledge, or control of key resources gained influence. In places like Real Alto, larger houses or ceremonial mounds hint at emerging distinctions, though societies remained largely egalitarian compared to later eras. Villages marked the threshold of complexity. They were crucibles where the seeds of future developments, pottery refinement, expanded trade, ceremonial architecture, and eventual full agriculture were sown. Not all groups crossed this threshold uniformly. Some remained mobile longer, others mixed strategies. But where villages took hold, humanity stepped from adaptation to the environment into active shaping of it, building homes that endured, creating spaces for shared memory, and forging communities that would grow into the civilizations of the Americas. This birth was quiet, incremental, yet irreversible. The moment when people chose not just to live in the world, but to dwell in it together. The invention of reliable food storage, dried grains, tubers processed into preservable forms, nuts sealed in baskets or pits, fundamentally revolutionized human existence in the ancient Americas. What had once been a daily scramble for sustenance in the unpredictable cycles of hunting, gathering, and early plant tending, gave way to a world where abundance could be captured, held, and carried forward. Surplus food sustained entire winters, bridged lean seasons, and freed portions of the population from constant foraging or hunting. This liberation enabled specialization. Some individuals could devote themselves full-time to crafting finely polished stone tools, weaving intricate textiles, healing with herbal knowledge passed through generations, or serving as ritual leaders who mediated between communities and the spiritual forces believed to govern rain, fertility, and harvest. These roles were not luxuries, but necessities in increasingly settled, interdependent villages, where the collective well-being depended on diverse skills. Yet this same surplus sowed the seeds of inequality, subtly at first, then inexorably. In egalitarian bands of the earlier Archaic period, resources were shared broadly, leadership was fluid and merit-based, and power was temporary, earned through skill in the moment and relinquished when the need passed. Stored food changed that dynamic. Families or kin groups who controlled access to better land, fertile floodplains that yielded richer maize harvests, sheltered valleys ideal for potato cultivation, or prime riverbanks for fishing, could accumulate more than others. Those with larger stores gained leverage. They could offer food during shortages, host feasts that built alliances, or sponsor the production of prestige items. Power, once ephemeral, began to linger, becoming embedded in social roles and lineages. In Mesoamerica, the rise of maize from its wild Teosinte ancestor exemplified this transformation. By the formative period, around 2000–1000 BCE, intensified maize cultivation produced surpluses that supported larger, more sedentary groups. Archaeological evidence from sites in the Tehuacan Valley, the Soconusco region, and the Gulf lowlands shows that maize became a staple, with storage pits and processing tools indicating deliberate accumulation. These surpluses did not immediately create vast hierarchies. Early societies like those ancestral to the Olmec relied on mixed subsistence, including fishing, hunting, and root crops, but they laid the groundwork. Surplus maize could be converted into labor for monumental projects, such as the early earthen platforms at San Lorenzo, Olmec heartland, or traded for exotic goods like jade, obsidian, and feathers. Aspiring leaders mobilized tribute or communal labor, using stored food to underwrite craft specialization and ceremonial events. This process accelerated during the Middle Formative, around 900–400 BCE, when maize symbolism flourished. Depictions of maize ears in art symbolized abundance and elite authority. The Olmec, often seen as a foundational complex society in Mesoamerica, illustrate how agricultural surplus, even if not solely maize-driven, enabled the emergence of regional centers, with evidence of craft workshops, long-distance exchange, and social distinctions visible in burials and architecture. In the high Andes, potatoes played a parallel role. Domesticated around 8000–5000 BCE near Lake Titicaca, potatoes thrived in the cold, high-altitude environments where maize struggled. Early farmers developed techniques like freeze-drying chuño, which allowed tubers to be preserved for years, creating reliable surpluses that buffered against frost, drought, or poor harvests. By the initial period, around 1800–900 BCE, and into the early horizon with the Chavin phenomenon, 900–200 BCE, potato cultivation supported growing populations and complex societies. The Chavin people grew potatoes alongside maize, quinoa, and other crops, using irrigation systems to expand production. Surpluses sustained communities at high elevation sites like Chavin de Huenter, a major ceremonial center where monumental architecture, temples, plazas, and carved stone reliefs required organized labor. Potato storage enabled feasting, which in turn built social obligations and potential inequalities. Leaders or kin groups controlling prime potato fields or storage facilities could sponsor rituals, trade for exotic materials, like spondylus shells from the coast or obsidian from distant sources, and accumulate influence. This pattern foreshadowed later Andean civilizations, where staple surpluses underpinned imperial structures. The shift extended beyond local storage to the emergence of trade networks, which connected distant regions and amplified the effects of surplus. In the Archaic to formative transition, exchange had been small-scale, local bartering of tools or raw materials, but surpluses created incentives for broader connections. In Mesoamerica, networks linked the Gulf lowlands with the highlands, carrying obsidian, jade, cacao, feathers, and ceramics. Early formative sites show evidence of interregional interaction, with goods moving through down-the-line trade or direct exchanges during pilgrimages to centers like San Lorenzo. These networks spread ideas, agricultural techniques, symbolic motifs such as maize gods, and social practices, fostering cultural integration. In the Andes, vertical complementarity, exchanging highland potatoes and quinoa for lowland maize, coca, or coastal fish, created vertical archipelagos of resource zones. Llama caravans facilitated long-distance movement, linking coastal, highland, and jungle regions. The Chavin sphere exemplifies this. A shared religious ideology spread across vast distances, supported by trade in ritual items and foodstuffs, drawing people to ceremonial centers where surpluses were redistributed. This profound alteration in human relations, from egalitarian bands to stratified societies, was gradual but irreversible. In villages, surplus created options. Some families stored more, gaining followers through generosity or coercion. Others specialized, becoming dependent on patrons. Social distinctions appeared in burials, richer grave goods for elites, and in architecture, larger houses or ceremonial structures for those with influence. Power became institutionalized, no longer purely situational. While many societies remained relatively egalitarian, as in some late archaic shell-midden communities, the trajectory toward complexity accelerated where surpluses were greatest. Emotions in this era were layered with new tensions. The security of full granaries brought relief and pride, yet the specter of unequal access bred resentment, envy, and ambition. Feasts celebrated abundance but reinforced hierarchies. Hosts gained prestige. Guests incurred obligations. Gratitude for shared food mingled with anxiety over scarcity or loss of control. Ritual leaders invoked spirits to ensure fertility, their authority bolstered by the ability to mobilize surplus for ceremonies. Ultimately, food storage and surplus were the quiet engines of transformation. They turned precarious existence into possibility, allowing humanity to build beyond survival, toward specialization, exchange, ceremony, and the intricate societies that would rise in the Americas. Yet they also introduced division. The same grain that fed a village could empower one family over another, setting the stage for the profound inequalities of later civilizations. This shift, born from hands in soil and eyes on the harvest, altered not just economies but the very fabric of human relationships, echoing through the millennia. As people in the ancient Americas transitioned from nomadic lives to more rooted village-based existence during the later Archaic and early formative periods, roughly 5000–1000 BCE and beyond, their spiritual world underwent a profound transformation. Spirituality became deeply intertwined with the land itself, earth, rivers, hills, fields, and the cycles of growth and decay. The act of staying in one place for generations meant that the landscape was no longer merely a backdrop for survival. It became a living entity imbued with sacred meaning, a partner in human endeavors, and a repository of memory. Ancestors, once distant in the endless migrations of hunter-gatherer bands, now rested nearby in the soil they had worked, their presence a constant reminder of continuity between past and present. Burials provide the clearest archaeological window into this emerging earthly spirituality. In many regions, the dead were interred close to homes or within village spaces, rather than distant from settlements as in earlier times. This proximity tied the living to the deceased in tangible ways. Graves became focal points for remembrance, places where families could return to offer food, tools, or personal items. In the eastern woodlands, late Archaic shell middens and mound sites often included human remains, suggesting that the accumulation of shells and debris itself served as a kind of monumental burial ground, blending daily waste with the sacred interment of kin. Burials in dirt mounds or beneath house floors indicate that ancestors were not exiled to remote cemeteries, but incorporated into the domestic sphere, their spirits watching over the household and ensuring fertility of both people and crops. Figurines, small clay or stone representations of human forms, often female, appear frequently in these contexts and point to ancestor veneration and the honoring of natural forces. In the Valdivia culture of coastal Ecuador, c. 3500–1500 BCE, one of the earliest settled societies in South America, the famous Venus of Valdivia figurines, slender, stylized female figures, have been interpreted as symbols of fertility, life cycles, and possibly mythical ancestors or shamanic spirits. These tiny statuettes, sometimes painted or incised with intricate details, depict women in various stages of life, from youthful to mature, pregnant, or elderly. Their presence in household contexts and near burials suggests they played roles in domestic rituals, perhaps as embodiments of ancestral women whose reproductive power mirrored the Earth's generative capacity. Some scholars see them as representations of a Mother Earth or fertility goddess, reflecting a matriarchal emphasis in Valdivia society, where women's ability to conceive was revered as parallel to the land's productivity. In Mesoamerica's early formative period, similar patterns emerge. Fired clay figurines from sites in the Mixteca Alto of Oaxaca, around 3,000 years old, show evidence of household ritual practices involving embodiment, figurines that may have been treated as living entities, broken, burned, or scattered in termination rites paralleling human and animal burials. These practices suggest animism, the belief that objects, plants, animals, and natural features possessed spirits or souls. Figurines were not mere art. They were active participants in rituals, perhaps standing in for ancestors or deities during ceremonies of renewal. Burials often included such figurines alongside offerings, reinforcing the idea that the dead retained influence over the living, ensuring the success of harvests or the health of the community. Rituals aligned closely with the agricultural cycle, grounding religion in the rhythms of planting and harvest. Songs invoking rain were sung during dry spells, their melodies rising from village plazas or fields as people danced to coax moisture from the sky. Offerings: maize kernels, squash seeds, blood from auto-sacrifice, pricking the tongue or ear, or small portions of the first harvest, were placed in hearths, buried in fields, or scattered on riverbanks to honor the forces that governed growth. Nature's elements were seen as life-givers. Rivers provided water and fish but could flood destructively. Hills sheltered villages yet harbored storms. Fields yielded bounty but demanded rest and respect. These forces were personified in spirits or deities, appeased through seasonal ceremonies that marked solstices, equinoxes, or the arrival of rains. In the Andes, early potato farmers developed similar practices, with high-altitude rituals honoring Pachamama, Earth Mother, through offerings of coca leaves, chicha, fermented corn drink, or animal fat buried in the soil. Though full-blown Andean religion crystallized later with Chavin, c. 900–200 BCE, its roots lie in archaic veneration of the land as a living being. Shamans or ritual specialists, possibly emerging in this era, mediated between humans and these forces, using figurines, music, and dance to ensure balance. This earthly, cyclical religion contrasted sharply with any lingering Paleolithic shamanism focused on animal spirits or distant sky realms. Here, spirituality was local, embodied, and reciprocal. Humans cared for the land through cultivation, and the land reciprocated with abundance. Emotions were deeply tied to these practices: gratitude for a successful harvest expressed in communal feasts, fear during droughts leading to intensified offerings, awe at the emergence of new life from soil. Burials with figurines or personal items suggest a belief in an afterlife where ancestors continued to participate, their spirits nourishing the fields as they had in life. This rooting of spirituality in the soil was not uniform. Regional variations abounded, but it laid the foundation for later complex religions in Mesoamerica: Olmec, Maya, and the Andes, Chavin, Inca. The land became sacred, ancestors eternal guardians, and rituals the bridge between human effort and cosmic order. In this way, the shift to settled life transformed not only subsistence but the very soul of ancient American peoples. The adoption of agriculture and settled village life in the ancient Americas was neither a sudden revolution nor a universal progression. Instead, it unfolded as a slow, uneven transformation, varying dramatically by region, ecology, and cultural choice. While some groups embraced farming as a primary subsistence strategy, others continued hunting and gathering for thousands of years, and many pursued mixed economies that blended old and new ways. This diversity was not a sign of backwardness, but a reflection of deep adaptation to the continent's immense ecological variety. From arid deserts to lush river valleys, high Andean plateaus to coastal wetlands. Change was measured not in decades but in lifetimes. A grandmother might recount tales of endless seasonal migrations, while her grandchild grew up knowing only the familiar contours of a village and the rhythm of planting seasons. In North America, the Archaic period, c. 8000–1000 BCE, illustrates this patchiness vividly. In the eastern woodlands, groups intensified nut gathering, shellfish harvesting, and riverine fishing, with some adopting early horticulture, sunflower, squash, but maintaining mobility. The Poverty Point culture, c. 1700–1100 BCE, built monumental earthworks without full agriculture, relying on trade and foraging. In the southwest, arid conditions delayed intensive farming. Early maize appeared around 2000 BCE, but many groups persisted with broad-spectrum foraging until the basket maker period, post-1000 BCE. The plains saw bison-focused hunting dominate, with little pressure toward crops due to vast grasslands. Mesoamerica showed earlier shifts: squash domesticated by 8000 BCE, maize intensifying by 2000 BCE in valleys like Tehuacan. Yet even here, coastal and highland groups mixed farming with fishing or hunting. In the Andes, potato cultivation supported semi-sedentary life by 5000 BCE, but camelid herding and wild resource use remained crucial. Coastal Peruvians relied on marine resources long after highland farming developed. This unevenness stemmed from environmental constraints and cultural preferences. In resource-rich areas, e.g., shellfish middens in the southeast, sedentism preceded full agriculture. In marginal zones, mobility offered security against crop failure. Mixed strategies, farming supplemented by hunting, provided resilience. Social factors mattered too. Egalitarian bands resisted hierarchies tied to land control. Across generations, this created poignant contrasts. Elders spoke of freedom in movement, the thrill of the hunt. Younger ones valued the security of stored food and familiar homes. This diversity enriched the cultural tapestry, ensuring no single path dominated and allowing adaptation to future. By around 3000 BCE, the Americas had undergone a quiet but sweeping transformation that set the stage for everything that followed. The continent, once traversed by small bands of hunter-gatherers following the rhythms of animals and seasons, now supported communities that understood plants intimately, shaped landscapes deliberately, and remembered time in structured, cyclical ways. Villages dotted fertile valleys, river floodplains, coastal estuaries, and highland plateaus, from the Pacific shores of Ecuador to the riverine bottoms of the Mississippi, from the Tehuacan Valley to the Andean Altiplano. These settlements were modest compared to the later cities of Teotihuacan, Chavindahuantar, or Cahokia, yet they contained the essential elements of future complexity: permanent architecture, surplus production, specialized labor, trade networks, and spiritual practices rooted in place. People had learned the language of plants through millennia of observation and selection. In Mesoamerica, maize had evolved from tiny teosinte ears into more productive forms, squash and beans forming the basis of the Three Sisters system. In the Andes, potatoes and quinoa provided hearty calories in challenging altitudes, while coastal groups cultivated cotton and fruits. This knowledge was not abstract. It was embodied in daily labor: women grinding seeds on metates, men clearing fields with digging sticks, families saving seeds from the best plants. Landscapes were shaped: forests cleared for gardens, riverbanks terraced, controlled burns encouraging useful species. The earth responded, yielding surpluses that sustained larger groups and allowed time for non-subsistence activities. Time itself had been tamed. Seasons were no longer mere backdrops but structured frameworks: planting with the first rains, wading through growth, harvesting before frost. Informal calendar centers, writing systems, or vast states that would arise. Their world was intimate: hands deep in soil turning earth, planting seeds with care, eyes lifted to the sky tracking clouds, stars, and the arc of the sun for signs of rain or frost. Emotions were grounded: satisfaction in a full granary, anxiety over drought, gratitude for a bountiful yield shared with kin. This age of staying was humanity's pivot point. From the patience of early experiments came the foundations of civilization, settled communities, accumulated knowledge, reciprocal relationships with the land. The transformation was profound yet humble, people still close to nature, their lives woven into the cycles they had learned to honor. In this quiet era, the destiny of the Americas was quietly forged, one seed, one generation, one rooted place at a time.